Federal authorities reportedly arrested a Milwaukee County Circuit judge this morning for allegedly.
We're going to start with FBI agents busy this morning, arresting nearly a dozen Bay Area police officers for methamphetamines.
Federal agents in New York City making the largest meth bust in recent history, and the way it was smuggled into the air.
15 days, 2 weeks, and 1 day. That's how long the Middle East has been watching the sky light up with explosions, tracking missiles in real time on their phones, and calculating how much higher their fuel costs have climbed. At 9:45 a.m. Tehran time, the United States and Israel launched what they called Operation Epic Fury. Nearly 900 strikes in the first 12 hours. A decision made in rooms no one would ever see, announced on screens everyone would remember. But by day to day, the nature of this conflict has fundamentally shifted. It is no longer about the opening strikes. It is no longer about what was destroyed on that first morning. It is about what comes next. And the answer to that question has become unclear. Let's start with what we know, because what we know is dramatic enough. The initial strike campaign was designed with a specific purpose: decapitation. Remove Iran's leadership before they could order retaliation. That part worked. In the opening hours of the war, the strike killed the supreme leader. In the opening hours of the war, the strike killed the supreme leader. His compound in Tehran was struck. Satellite imagery confirmed the destruction. Within hours, Israeli and American intelligence assessed that they had also killed Defense Council Secretary Ali Shamkhani, IRGC Commander Mohammad Pakpour, Defense Minister Aziz Nasirzadeh, and Iran's intelligence chief. The regime's top tier was gone, but Iran replaced its leadership. Just 9 days after Khamenei's death, the Assembly of Experts appointed his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the new supreme leader. This was not supposed to happen. Israel had bombed the Assembly of Experts building on, attempting to prevent this meeting. The message was clear. Israel was trying to prevent Iran from establishing a clear line of succession. And yet, despite the bombing, despite the airstrikes, despite everything the US and Israel had planned, Iran's Leadership Council found a way to meet. They voted. They appointed a new leader. The regime continued. Days later, information emerged about the new supreme leader's condition. US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth stated publicly that Mojtaba Khamenei was wounded and likely disfigured. The Trump administration offered a $10 million reward for information about him and other top officials. For a moment, it seemed like the regime was on the verge of collapse. But it wasn't. And that's when something became clear to military analysts watching this unfold. A modern military can destroy buildings, can kill leaders, can paralyze infrastructure. But it cannot easily paralyze a government determined to continue functioning. The scale of the bombing campaign by day 14 had become staggering. Israel alone had conducted 7,600 strikes inside Iran. Another 1,100 strikes in Lebanon against Hezbollah positions. The United States had conducted an equivalent campaign. Nearly every major military facility in Iran had been struck. Multiple times. Redundantly. Because military planners knew that one strike was not enough to truly disable a modern nation's military capability. The American and Israeli strike campaign shifted focus. Instead of targeting military bases and weapons production, they targeted the regime's internal security apparatus. Law enforcement command facilities. Basic checkpoints. IRGC command centers. The physical infrastructure that the Iranian government uses to maintain control over its own population. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated publicly that Israel was creating the optimal conditions for toppling the regime. The message was unmistakable: military strikes alone would not achieve victory. What was needed was internal instability, collapse from within, civil disorder that the regime couldn't suppress. To do that, you have to target the security forces, the secret police, the informants, the mechanism by which an authoritarian government maintains power over an unwilling population. Shortly after, strikes began targeting basic sites. According to satellite imagery and intelligence reports, strike after strike focused on basic and law enforcement command facilities across Tehran. The goal was clear: disrupt the regime's ability to crack down on its own people. At the same time, the US-Israel campaign struck Iran's missile production capacity. Pete Hegseth announced that American and Israeli strikes have functionally defeated Iran's ballistic missile production capability. The missile industrial base has been destroyed. The plants that manufacture missile components are gone. Entire factories dedicated to building weapons have been turned into rubble. Israel reported that it had destroyed between 160 and 190 missile launchers and disabled another 200. According to an Israeli military official, Iranian missile crews are now afraid to go out. There are desertions, refusals to follow orders. Soldiers don't show up when mobilized. But despite this level of destruction, despite the deaths of senior leaders, despite the paralysis of military production, Iran has continued to attack. And the attacks have continued to find targets. Iranian drones have attacked bases from Kuwait to Qatar to Saudi Arabia to the United Arab Emirates to Bahrain. Iranian missiles have struck Israeli cities. As recently as March, Iranian missiles struck a residential area in northern Israel, forcing evacuations and injuring residents. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced coordinated strikes with Hezbollah, as part of what they called Al-Quds Day, a demonstration of support for Palestine. The statements were defiant. The regime was saying, "We are still here. We are still fighting. We are still willing to fire our weapons." But the numbers tell a different story. Pete Hegseth said on March 13 that Iranian missile volume is down 90% since the start of the war. One-way attack drone volume is down 95%. Bloomberg reported that Western intelligence estimates Iran's total offensive capability has been degraded by 80%. The drones are gone. The missiles are depleted. The production facilities are destroyed. Iran is fighting now with whatever remains of its arsenal, which means Iran is on a countdown. They are attacking with what they have left, knowing that once it's gone, replacement will take months or years. The US struck Iran's Karg Island. This is not a symbolic target. Karg Island is the economic lifeline of the Islamic Republic. 90% of Iran's oil exports pass through this facility before being shipped through the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. The Trump administration announced that it had bombed military installations on Karg Island. Trump stated specifically that he had chosen to spare the oil infrastructure for reasons of decency. But he also warned that if Iran attempted to interfere with shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, he would reconsider that decision. The unstated message was unmistakable: "We can collapse your economy anytime we choose. We are choosing not to. Do not test us." Simultaneously, Iran is allowing selective shipping through the strait. 2 Indian liquefied petroleum gas carriers were permitted passage. Turkish vessels have been allowed through. Iraqi oil tankers have been granted permission if they certify they're not owned by Americans or Israelis. This is Iran attempting to maintain some shipping activity, maintain some economic lifeline, while the United States maintains the threat of economic annihilation. It's a negotiation conducted through shipping lanes and drone attacks. The regional conflict has expanded in ways that no initial strike planning could have contained. When the US and Israel attacked Iran, they knew that Iran had proxies. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, Iraqi militias backed by the IRGC. But they may not have fully anticipated how quickly and how thoroughly these proxies would respond. In Lebanon, Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 773 people since March 2. Hezbollah has claimed 25 attacks targeting Israeli forces and positions on a single day. An Israeli medical center in Borj Kalawai was struck, killing 12 medical workers, doctors, nurses, paramedics. Israeli strikes hit a UN peacekeeping base. Smoke rose from the rubble. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that Lebanon would pay an increasing price in infrastructure damage. Israeli media reported that Israeli military officials are discussing potential expansion of ground operations into Lebanon, possibly all the way to the Litani River. This started as a US-Iran conflict. It has become an Israel-Hezbollah conflict running parallel, and there is no clear line between them anymore. In Iraq, Iranian-backed militias have launched dozens of drone attacks against US military facilities. A French base in Erbil was struck by a drone, killing 1 French service member and wounding 6 others. The US embassy in Baghdad has been attacked. The helipad at the embassy was hit by a missile. An air defense system was destroyed. Militias are launching attacks on bases across the country. An intelligence official with one of the Iranian-backed groups announced that operations are entering a second phase with qualitative objectives that add headings, format paragraph styles, and they will appear in your table of contents. Signal a shift to a new level of pressure and deterrence. What that means is unclear, but the message is that the violence is not decreasing. In the Gulf, the economic impact has become a secondary conflict. Oil prices have surged. Maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has dropped by 97%. Shipping companies are routing vessels thousands of kilometers out of their way. Insurance companies are refusing to provide coverage. Canada announced it would release 23.6 million barrels of oil as part of an emergency coordinated effort by the International Energy Agency. Indian airlines have raised ticket prices to cover surging aviation fuel costs. The International Energy Agency announced the release of 400 million barrels of oil to stabilize the market. But here is the critical part. Despite the military dominance of the US and Israel, despite the destruction of Iran's military infrastructure, despite the killing of senior leaders, despite the degradation of Iran's military capability by 80% according to Western intelligence estimates, key countries are now negotiating directly with Iran. India, France, Italy are reaching out to Iran directly to negotiate safe passage for their vessels. They are not going through Washington anymore. They are not waiting for American guarantees. They are dealing directly with Tehran. This represents a profound shift. The United States, by exercising overwhelming military power, has actually lost some of its diplomatic leverage. The vacuum it created is being filled by countries that are doing what states have always done, protecting their own interests. The American military buildup continues. The USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship, is being deployed to the Middle East along with 2,500 Marines. The U.S. is deploying 10,000 interceptor drones to the region. Secretary of Defense Hegseth stated that the U.S. military will show no quarter, no mercy to its enemy. The statement raised concerns among Democratic officials about potentially illegal orders. The language of total war was being used. The rhetoric was escalating. But on the ground, Iran continues to function as a government. Iran continues to fight. And the end state remains unclear. The human cost continues to mount. At least 1,444 people have been killed in U.S.-Israel attacks on Iran, according to the latest casualty tracker. Another 18,551 were injured. In Lebanon, at least 773 dead. In Israel, at least 12 killed from Iranian strikes and Lebanese attacks. American service members, 7 confirmed dead. The count grows with each day. The families grow. The notifications continue. One critical element has emerged as perhaps more significant than all the missiles and drones: internal regime instability. Anti-regime media reported that some clerics in Iran have raised concerns about the new supreme leader's physical condition and his capacity to govern. These aren't external critics. These are people inside the regime, people with power. They are questioning whether the new supreme leader is fit to lead. Some have suggested reinstating an institutional leadership council to manage state affairs until a new leader is selected. If this information is accurate, then the bombing campaign has achieved something that missiles alone cannot do. It has created a power vacuum inside Iran's leadership structure. The current supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, was appointed by the clerical establishment, but there are reports that some clerics opposed his selection even before he was chosen. Now, with him potentially wounded and disfigured, according to U.S. officials, his legitimacy is fragile. The regime is attempting to project stability while managing an internal succession crisis. That is exponentially more difficult than managing a military crisis. A military crisis can be solved with better weapons or better strategy. A succession crisis can end with civil war, with regime fracture, with collapse. But we cannot know if this will happen. We can only observe what has happened. And what has happened is this: in 15 days, the US and Israel have degraded Iran's military by an estimated 80%. They have killed Iran's most senior leader, and his security apparatus has survived. They have struck nearly every military facility in Iran, and Iran continues to attack. They have created conditions of internal instability, and the regime continues to function. The question now is not whether the regime will collapse. The question is whether it will be forced to make a deal, whether it will be forced to negotiate, whether the combination of military pressure and internal instability will push Iran's leadership toward a settlement. But settlement on whose terms? That remains unclear. The Trump administration initially pushed for regime change. Then it suggested being open to a Venezuelan-type outcome where the regime remains in place but becomes cooperative. Now officials are talking about influencing who becomes the next supreme leader. The goalposts have moved. The strategy has shifted. And Iran, still willing to fire missiles, still willing to authorize attacks, still willing to claim victory even as its military capability diminishes, has not shifted. It has dug in. There are credible reports that Iranian missile crews are deserting, that soldiers are refusing to report for duty, that the IRGC attempted to mobilize reserve forces and many didn't show up. A government losing the willingness of its soldiers to fight is a government in existential crisis. And yet, Iran continues to authorize attacks. Orders continue to be given. Missiles continue to launch, albeit in dramatically reduced numbers. The conflict that seemed at its beginning like it would be a brief, overwhelming demonstration of military superiority has instead become something much more complex. A war where air superiority and overwhelming firepower have not produced clarity. A war where destroying a nation's military infrastructure has not ended its capacity to fight. A war where killing a leader has not decapitated the regime. It is now a conflict of attrition, of endurance, of waiting to see whether Iran's government will outlast its military capacity, or whether its government will fracture under pressure before its weapons run out. 15 days in, and the answer to that question is still unknown. What we know is that missiles continue to fall. The sky continues to light up. And in bases from Kuwait to Qatar to Saudi Arabia to the United Arab Emirates, soldiers continue to wait for the next attack. In Israel, sirens continue to sound. In Lebanon, hospitals continue to receive casualties. And in Iran, a new supreme leader is attempting to govern a nation whose military is being systematically destroyed, whose economy is on the verge of collapse, and whose internal leadership is questioning whether he is fit to lead. This is day of a conflict with no clear ending. The question is no longer whether the US and Israel can destroy Iran's military. That answer is already clear. The question is whether military destruction can produce political collapse. And in the Middle East, in the space between military victory and political outcome, that gap has historically proven to be the most dangerous distance of all.